Okay. And we're reaching the final class of the series of Taharas Hamishpacha. Lays the foundation for the fact that Lefi the Machshavas is Mamshech Levush Kodesh Lenishmas, famous, I don't know who, the Pirush, that was in typewriter, was gedreht. I think mitzvahs, that's the kavanah of the levush kodesh lenishmas b'nai. What's this heilige levushim is the derher in kedusha. So the perspective, together with being practical and being a mensch, is super important, not only as a reminder, but to refresh and to continuously learn and develop the Yeshivas of Chassidus that there's a tremendous amount on the subject. And as we said, Alter Rebbe Mamish lays the foundations right at the beginning of Torah Shebeksav of Chassidus. So we're very, very honored to have together with us Mashpia and Beis Dovid Shlomo, New Haven, Rabbi Yitzchak.
Was a tzimtzum, not stam a tzimtzum. Chassidus goes into detail that the world was created with a tzimtzum b'derech siluk. In other words, Hashem had to totally, kaviyachol, remove himself and create a Machon panoi, create space. Why? Because the goal, Hashem's taiva, was that there should be a metzias outside of him, totally outside of him, totally independent of him, and that through avodah we should develop a relationship between Hashem and Olamus. But Olamus need to be total otherness. Needs to be totally independent, totally separate from Hashem. The goal is that you should have this other metzias called Olamus, Yidin, Neshamas Yisrael, and through avodah, ultimately culminating with Mashiach, but through avodah, we should build a total seamless integration between Elyonim and Tachtonim. And we know Chassidus elaborates that the goal is not that Elyonim yelo Tachtonim and Tachtonim yalo Elyonim, that they should lose their metzias. Tachtonim should become ois Tachtonim. The world should lose its independence, lose its metzias, lose its identity, and just become halik. For that, Hashem didn't need to create a world. No need for a tzimtzum. No need for any of this. Hashem had malachim, and you could have a metzias of halikite, a metzias of kedusha, where the kavanah would have already been completed. What Hashem is looking for, and we call it a taiva, Hashem is looking for this real relationship. And Chassidus, we could carry this through the entirety of history. Hashem creates the world is a metzias. There's some ups and downs, some mabul, enish, figuring things out. And finally, it takes almost 2,000 years, Avram Avinu hikeres bayrei. You finally have Avram Avinu mitamo. Finally, humanity developed, and the metzias of Welt, the independent metzias of Welt, became had its own identity. And the world matured with its own seichel, its own identity, and slowly, Avram Avinu hikeres bayrei. Finally, metzias and Welt, the world was able to appreciate that there's something called the Eibishter, that's not just an extension of the world, like all of the other Avodah Zaros up until then. Seichel understands that there's something greater. So the entirety of Avodah Zarah was that humans create something to serve. The human mind creates an image of what the ultimate power is. The Chiddush of Avram Avinu Hikir as Bayrei. Avram Avinu was able to, through Seichel, through the human process, he was able to accept and realize that there must be something beyond what we can understand. There's a Bayrei, there's a real Eibishter, there's Atmos, there's something that is not built by us, we don't understand it, we can never understand it, but this is Avram Avinu Hikir Bayrei. So this independent Metzias called Olamais, called the world, has finally matured to the point where it's able to acknowledge that there is something independent of us. Something can exist outside of my brain and how I see the world. And this we can follow through history. Avram Avinu starts, we have the Avis, Ma'aseh Avisim Labanim, and we finally get through Yetzias Mitzrayim, because this explains a Hachana from Matan Torah. We finally come to Matan Torah, where this Kavana starts to actually take place. Vayera Davai al Har Sinai, Al Yonim came down to this world, we came up the mountain, and we started to create this real physical connection with the Elokus. The Kavana that Hashem had day one starts to materialize. And we have, Sichos and Memorim about Shavuos that explain this yichud that occurs here. Now, right away, right after Matan Torah, we have the Egel. We have Ma'aseh Egel, and which concludes with Moshe Rabbeinu breaking the luchos. What happens? Vayera Davai al Har Sinai, this relationship starts to take place. Yidden connecting with the Eibishter is connecting with Yidden. But there's a real struggle. Yidden are sitting there and they're saying, where's Moshe Rabbeinu? Where's Elokus? We're supposed to now have this tangible connection with Hashem, but we made cheshbonos. It's supposed to be something real. It's supposed to be something human. And all of a sudden, Moshe Rabbeinu is not coming down. So they say, we need a physical, tangible Eibishter. So they build an Egel. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down, and obviously he breaks the luchos. And Hashem famously tells him, Yasher koyach sheshibarta. What happened is, Yidden are trying to develop this relationship with Hashem. They want it to be tangible. They want it to be physical. They want it to be something that they can relate to. Begidrei hatachtin. But they failed. Because begidrei hatachtin doesn't mean you create it. That's back to Avodah Zarah, back to before Avram Avinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes and Moshe Rabbeinu breaks the luchos. He breaks the luchos, which represents that this model that everyone had about what yichud, what dir b'tachtonim is supposed to mean, is wrong. Reset. Hashem says, Yeshikoyach sheshibarta. Yeshikoyach, good job. Why? First of all, for Yidden, we know Chassidus explains that the Luchos Shniyos came about through Bittul and Avodas HaTshuva, and the rest of Torah is developed through Luchos Shniyos. By breaking the Luchos, you force the Yidden to recognize that Elokus is not something you can build. You can't create an Eibishter. An Egel cannot be something that a human can create. An Eibishter is not something you can create. And also, Hashem says, for him. Thank you for showing me that this is not a real yichud. It's not working. The ultimate kavanah is not yet happening. Because Hashem came down on Har Sinai, Kaf aleim har kegigis, Luchis Maisa Lakim Hema. Luchis were pure Elokus. Once again, Hashem is giving us Himself. I don't know He's giving us Himself in Maisa Lakim Hema. That's not the kavanah. The kavanah is that Yidden, Begashmias, als Tachtin, should be able to appreciate their Her Elokus. So Yeshkoyach Sheshibarta. And the next step, Hashem says to Moshe, Psolacha. You need to write it. You need to create it. Has to come from the Tachtin. The Tachtin has to create this connection. I did my part. Vayer Davayel Ar Sinai. Now it's time for you to do your part. You need to come elevate Tachtin and their Her Elokus on your level. Now, the truth is that the Rebbe's Torah, you can see this theme playing itself out throughout history. Historically, we go through the Midbar, finally Shlach, Koirach, these parshas coming to Yisrael. It's about doing mitzvahs maisiyas. It's about Elokus becoming part of human life, in a way part of day to day. You wake up and you do mitzvahs, and part of it's physical, it's real, it's a mitzias. We come into Eretz Yisrael, and again, history slowly evolves. We build the Mishkan, Golos, Beis Hamikdash, Torah Shabbal Peh, Tanoim, Amoraim. And what's happening throughout this entire history is that Elokus is slowly integrating into the world step by step. First you have Nevuah. Nevuah is where human mind, a human can actually see and connect with Elokus, but it comes Milmaila. After Nevuah, you get to Ajik Nes Agdola, that period of time where Torah became part of the human mind. Chachamim create Torah. Because this integration is developing. And to skip through history, we finally get to the Arizal. Rebbe points out that the Chiddush of Primus HaTorah comes into the world, where the world is not just now, the integration of Elokus and the world is not just, a theoretical thing or about doing mitzvahs, nigla. Now it's about Primus HaTorah. We can actually, the deeper parts of Hashem are being integrated with humanity, with Welt. And obviously, coming to the Baal Shem Tov, Frutim Anasech Chutza, and the Rabbeim, each generation, the Rebbe points out, the Far Peterburg, Noch Peterburg, is all different shlovim in Elokus becoming part of integrating into the world. Go as far as Yud Shvat, Yud Aleph Shvat, Chof Ches, Prurvu, you need a Zachar, you need a Prurvu, you need a Zachar, you need a Nekeva. So every single creature was created in such a form. Adam and Chava, on the other hand, were created as one. Adam Nivra Yechidi. Were created as one. That Chava, depends how you want to explain it, but in Kabbalah, I think Chava and Adam and Chava were stuck back to back. Because ultimately, the goal, the purpose of the human is to reach the state of Yichud. And that's how we were talking created. We were created in a way, in a perfect form, as we're supposed to be, in a state of Yichud. Chassidus explains, based on the Zohar, this concept of Nisira, that ultimately, the kavanah is not that there should be a yichud chitzoni, which means a superficial connection. But as we described, the goal is dirab tachtonim. The goal is full integration. That Adam and Chava, a man and woman, should become totally integrated one with another. And for that purpose, Hashem split them. Broke the luchas. Created a tzimtzum, where you now have this separation, where you now have this metzius of otherness. Chava is not anymore an extension of Adam. Chava is now her own unique metzius. Now, as history goes on, like we described by Rabbi Yitzchak, the same is true about marriages, relationships. We can even go back as far as 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And the way our parents and our grandparents married, lived, it's nothing like what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. One hand, they met each other for 5 minutes on the subway. They rode into the Rebbe and Mazel Tov, Gedik. And for us, most of us are kaviyachol getting to know each other, building relationships, creating some sort of idea of a choice, this conscious choice that I found the one. And the truth is, being that we are getting closer to Mashiach, where this integration of Elokus and Oilimus is becoming so real, marriage reflects the same thing. Our marriages are becoming very much aligned with this idea that the man and woman are becoming integrated. And we connect, sometimes at such a deep level, but our lives are mamish intertwined one with another. To the point where your grandmother is going to tell you, oh, what do you mean you do this, and what are you doing in the kitchen? Now, it's normal. Helping this way, helping that way, being involved in men's, being involved in women's avodah, women being involved in men's avodah. The fact is, our lives are much more integrated. The expectations that we have from one another are much more integrated. We're not just expecting a woman to be a woman in traditional woman's roles, and a man's going to be a man. Everything is integrated. Because in truth, we want this connection, this integration of Mashiach times. But what happens is, we run a real risk. Because once we're so integrated, we end up forgetting and losing sight of the first step. The first step is that the tzimtzum b'derech siluk. The first step is you break the glass. The luchos are broken. That this fantasy or whatever you expected or thought marriage is going to look like has to break. It has to shatter. Because the first step of yichud is to recognize that there's an other. That we're independent beings that have nothing to do with each other. Same way a Welt cannot understand what the Eibishter is. It's impossible. You have to look at your spouse the same way. At a certain point, it is impossible to understand who she is, what she is, why she is. And that is always step one. We have this, famous the medrash that Mater Nisa, this noble woman, came to Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta, and she asks him, how long did it take Hashem to create the world? He says 6 days. So she says to him, what's Hashem doing since then? Thousands of years, what's he doing? So Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta tells her, he's being mezavik zivugim, he's making shidduchim. So she says to him, what's the big deal? He says, it's a big deal. Kosher kikris yamsuf. Now, that night, she says, okay, fine, no, I'll show you. I can do this. She says she has 1,000 male servants, 1,000 females. That night, she puts them all together. She makes shidduchim. That night, there's 1,000 weddings. Comes the next morning, she comes out, and everyone's banging her on her door, screaming, what did you do? This guy's a Meshigana. Why did you give me her? And each one has a broken bones, and there's chaos. So she comes running back to Rabbi Yitzchak and says, I see. It's not such a pashta zach. I think there's a letter from the Rebbe, actually. The Rebbe points out that the shidduch itself is kosher k'kriyas yamsuf. But I think after the shidduch is yosef b'kriyas yamsuf. Because the shidduch itself is one step of a tzimtzum, one nesira. You need to take two different people and make them at least think, to some degree, that they know each other and they want to build a life together. But, as the pasuk tells us very clearly, Vayashkim ba'boker v'hine hi Leah. Day after you get married, some people it's not the day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, maybe a year, whatever it is. At some point, Vayashkim ba'boker v'hine hi Leah. You had these chalemas, you're getting married to Rachel, and life is going to be beautiful, life is going to be perfect. Whatever we discussed, whatever our plans were, whatever my plans were, are obviously going to just seamlessly go work out. But v'hine hi Leah. You break the glass, you come to this reality that whatever you thought is not what's happening here. And in a way, day by day, we are uncovering more and more differences. So not just is, okay, fine, so I thought she was this, okay, now I realize she's this. But day after day, there's more and more nuances and differences. And we can joke about them, and we can laugh about them. But the reality is that we're constantly learning, especially, or let's call it, this is the first stage of marriage, is where you're learning that your wife is not who you thought she was. She's not just an extension of your metzias. She's not a prop in your chalemus. She's another. She's a metzias k'shel atzma. She has her own identity, which to some degree doesn't make any sense to you. You pasha can't wrap your head around it. Like the Eibishter and Oilimus, we cannot possibly understand the Eibishter. But believe me, the Eibishter looking at us and Shagasin, like, we're different. We're fundamentally different. And the differences just keep on piling on. I'm all at the difference of, you know, we can joke about the differences in seichel, in midas. We joke about the differences in what's important, what's not important. But these differences compound and develop. And they really make us question. They really challenge our original belief that, we found a match made in heaven, kaviyachol, and that this is going to be a smooth sailing ride. Now the real challenge comes when we start taking these differences And naturally, we start attaching right and wrong to them. So now it's not just a matter of a difference, okay? You like chocolate, I like ice cream. Big deal. But it gets deeper, it's more fundamental. Is a budget a real thing? We have to keep a budget, it's right. But I need a shaitel. You have to be mesudar. You have to go to sleep early. Get up early. It's wrong. If you stay up late, it's wrong. And we start using right and wrong to define differences. And it goes deep. Goes to hashkafa, goes to chinuch, goes to big life choices. And all of a sudden we're at this place where you're talking about what you believed. Of course, we're going to go on shlichus, we have plans, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to, whatever we decided, discussed our life is going to look like, out the window. V'hini hileya. And then we go into this right and wrong mode, where chinuch is important, so we have to send our kids there, and we can't let this in the house, we can't let that. The other one says, no, that's of course chinuch is important, but this is not important. And we get into these discussions where differences now turn into debates. Differences now turn into right and wrong, which leads us to actually look at the other person as a problem. If only the Eibishter gave me a wife like this, then everything would be good. And unfortunately, it gets to the point where some people start questioning the whole thing made kara. What are we doing here? What's the point of this? What's happening is our original dream, our original fantasy, that marriage is about being best friends. Marriage is about being aligned and being the same. Similarity means connection. We're on the same page. That has to be totally broken down. Because as we described, yichud doesn't mean we're just naturally aligned. Dir b'tachtonim doesn't mean that the Eibishter comes and creates a world and automatically Mashiach comes and everything's perfect. Yichud, dir b'tachtonim means that we have to build and develop and mature this integration. Because it has to be fully there. Every layer of existence has to be part of this yichud. Yichud is only possible when you have two different things, when you have other. And just like when the Eibishter created the world, there was a tzimtzum, there's a mabul. After the Eibishter gave us the Torah, we begin another shlav in Dir b'tachtonim. There's an egel, there's broken luchas. This has to happen. We have to recognize differences. Because only when we can recognize differences could we actually start developing real yichud. Now, the challenge that people face is that when we start facing differences, you have two types of people who take two totally different paths. You have some people who find differences and they just want to ignore them. Let's try to avoid differences, avoid conflict, and we'll figure out how to make space for each other to be who we are, and we'll just develop our relationship in a certain category. In a way, it's like Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem V'Aretz Nasan L'Vnei Adam. It's like you go daven, you have a relationship with Eibishter only in this place, but here we don't. Now I'm on my own. I can be my own Metzias. Chassidus demands and Yichud demands that there's no such thing as outside the Beis Medrash, outside the shul. There has to be a connection, there has to be a relationship, a Yichud with the Eibishter. It might look different, but there has to be a Yichud on all levels, on all layers. But that's one path people take. Let's avoid conflict, avoid issues. Now, obviously, there's place for that. But in truth, it's Hepech HaKavana. We know when this happens, people develop resentment, people develop all sorts of bad feelings, or at least there's this fundamental belief that this doesn't work. Here it can work, we can make it work here, but we can't make it work over here. Okay, that's one path people take. Another path people take is, okay, bittul. I have to start saying, I have to forget what I had in mind. Kol asher tomer lecha sara shma b'koila. Bittul b'metzias. Get rid of your ideas, your preferences, your identity, your mohus, and just create yichud. Figure out how to make this work. Once again, same mistake. It's not a matter of elokus and Welt integrating and start using the term yichud. Because Sholom Bayis means, okay, there's conflict, there's an issue, there's a war, and we have to make shalom. So we figure out how to navigate to a place of shalom, Sholom Bayis. Oh. But in truth, our goal has to be yichud. We're not looking just to overcome and ignore and manage differences. Yichud means that we see the differences, and the differences are the way that we create a connection. Dira b'tachtonim. Elokus doesn't come down here and say, oh, Welt, that's grabkeit. I'll ignore that part. No, you have Apichsidis, it goes mamish ad asaf. That every part of Welt, even klippus, even hepech hakdusha kaviyachol, has to become part of Elokus. That's the dir b'tachtonim. It's one yichud, one unit. So what do we do with the differences? How do we navigate this? So the bottom line is that differences are never problems. Never. Same way the Eibishter wanted otherness, he wanted Welt to be its own mitzias, that literally on its own, look around the world, 99.9% of the universe does not have any derher in elokus. What do you have? You have Yidden, you have some Yidden. What are Yidden compared to Goyim, compared to Doimim, to Me'ach, Chaim? Yidden, mamish 0.00% of Welt appreciates elokus. Because Welt on its own, the natural state of the world, is Lo Yadaitis Hashem. There's no, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't exist. How am I supposed to prove it? Because we're taka other. We're taka a different mitzias, a separate mitzias. That's not related in any way. And the chiddush is that dafka because we're different. That's where the Eibishter wants the yichud. That's the dir b'tachtonim. And in marriage, the same thing is true. Differences are never, ever problems. Differences are the proof that you married an other. Differences are proof that there's room for yichud here. That we could actually be malik kavana here. So the avoid is not to overcome differences, get rid of differences. The avoid is to really, really accept, value, and see the differences, and figure out how to connect with the differences, through the differences. The differences themselves should connect you. Now, I think this is, famous Kutzker Wort. Ich bin ich, weil ich bin ich, und du bist du, weil du bist du. What's the Wort? The Wort is that if I am I because you are you, in other words, my Metzias is only dependent on your Metzias, then I'm not me and you're not you. But if I am I and you are you, ich bin ich und du bist du, I have my own Metzias. I have my own unique identity, my own Meshigasim, my own Hergeshim, my own Milas and Chesroinus. And du bist du, you have your own Metzias. Totally independent of each other. Kaviyachol, we speak different languages. The whole system is different. We're pashut, totally different. That's where yichud begins. This is where the avoid of marriage really begins. If we look at differences as right and wrong, then you end up missing the point. You're going to say sometimes take. Fortunately, sometimes we have disagreements that are mamash fundamental. Everything you've been brought up in yeshiva to believe in, to value, mitamo, it's like, doesn't begin. Chinuch, real things. We have real differences. How could you not look at it as right and wrong? How could you just say it's a difference? It's taka right and wrong. So the famous story, I think you can see it on video, it's written, it's a woman, Mrs. Sarah Carmeli. I think she's a college teacher. She speaks about Sholom Bayis and marriage, and she was introduced to the Rebbe somehow, probably in the 80s. And basically she got totally hooked. She wanted to start covering her hair. She wanted to start doing everything. Problem was, her husband was a regular, traditional Persian Jew. Did what he did, Shabbos to some degree, Kashrus to some degree, but none of this, wasn't interested in any of these radical changes. So she wrote to the Rebbe. And she says, what do you mean? Torah says, this is emes. Torah says, I need to cover my hair. I need to keep everything. My husband, what should I do? He doesn't want. And she speaks how the Rebbe changed her entire attitude. Because the Rebbe said to her, I think the Rebbe said two things to her. Because number one, you cannot fight about Yiddishkeit. You fight about Yiddishkeit becomes puzzle. Your kids are going to think it's puzzle. Your husband's going to think it's puzzle. You can't fight about it. Second of all, it's not your job to convince him about it. Your job is Sholom Bayis. Your job is to make things work in your home. It should be a wholesome, healthy home. And she said this totally changed her entire attitude. Once again, there's no right and wrong. Yes, there's right. Yes, there's wrong. But the first step is to acknowledge that we're different. And she says, once she let him go, she stopped trying to convert him, be mekad of him. So slowly, they figured it out. And this is true most of the time. Most of the time, when differences become problems, when differences become issues, most of the time what's happening is, I feel overpowered by your metzius, and you feel overpowered by my metzius. And that's why we have to fight. I'm fighting to be seen as an other. I'm fighting to keep my metzius. You're fighting to keep your metzius. But really, the solution usually is very simple. Most of the time. If both parties are seen and respected as an other, as valid, not wrong, not silly, not immature, not, oh, you stop being anxious, you stop worrying, not belittling, putting down whatever the experience is, but valuing, this is metzius. This is a real thing. Usually when that happens, the solution is usually pretty simple. Ruba de ruba. And if not, okay. You go be Messiahs with a Mashpia, a Rav, a therapist, whatever it is, you figure things out. But that's usually kleinigkeit relative to the survival, the fight for survival that ends up happening. And this is also, people have been married for 10, 15, 20 years, turn around and say, why on earth are we sitting here 20 years later and we're Pashut still bringing back and having the same arguments, the same discussions that have literally been going on for 20 years. The same types of things come up and create the same cycle and the same loop. Why? Because Hagufa, Azay Darf Zayin, you're different. These are your differences. Acknowledge it. Accept it. Let it be. See it as a difference. Don't see it as a challenge. And ultimately, if we go back to the model of the Eibishter, we'll see that these are the two fundamental ingredients that marriage has to have, that yichud has to have. What is yichud? Yichud, we saw by Derb Tachtonim, is two totally independent realities, El Yonim Tachtonim, El Kus Welt, that are mamish opposites in every way. They do not understand each other at all. What's the kavanah? That these two things should remain two separate things, and yet they should be 100% integrated. Welt should see Elokus and der Herr value Elokus als Welt. We're not looking to overpower and bulldoze the other mitzias. Adrabah, let's find the differences and let's create a connection. So yichud is going to have, in a way, two opposite tracks. The first step of yichud is to acknowledge independence. Tzimtzum b'derech siluk, shviras haluchas, vayashkim habayker v'hini leah. First step always comes first. There has to be this acknowledgement of difference. And the second step is to acknowledge with this difference to create full integration and connection. And that's a real yichud. If we think about our relationship with the Eibishter, we think about marriage, you'll see both of these things are constantly coming up. What do you hear from people in marriage? You hear from people, I don't feel like he understands me. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get me. What's she saying? He doesn't see me for who I am. He sees me through his own lenses. The other thing you hear is he doesn't care about me. People find these differences. This conflict, contempt develops. And everyone just kind of like goes their own way and kind of lives alongside each other, and Sholom Bayis makes things work. Yichud has to have avodah on both kavim. There has to be an avodah to see the other as unique, as independent, as autonomous, and yet to be fully focused on developing integration and connection with this unique mitzias. In Avodas Hashem, we see the same thing. Avodas Hashem is overall Ava and Yira. What's Ava? What's Yira? First of all, it starts with Yira. Reishis Chachma, Yiras Hashem. Yira is the first step. Yira is, al pi Chassidus, seeing Hashem as independent, as unique, as something that I can't understand, something I can't fully appreciate. It's acknowledging, it's respecting the difference. It's realizing that Hashem is not just the way I see Him. Hashem is Taka Yachid Yuchid. And then you have the Avodah of Ava, that yes, we have to now develop a connection and feeling and real connection and Avas Hashem. Marriage, we see the same thing. There has to be, one might say that throughout Hilchos Nidar or Hilchos Harchakis, there's this time, a fundamental part of marriage is the space where you see each other as different, as separate. You get to know each other as different people. Not just an extension of my life, part of me. Separate, independent. And then you obviously have the Yira, you have the Ava, you have the connection. Yichud is always going to be a result of these two ingredients. Okay. Now, another idea which we see connects, something we see already in the Maimer, Chadaidi, the introduction to marriage, al pi Chassidus, is that you have this dynamic called Mashpia Makabel, which I know is thrown around left, right, and center, and translated in all sorts of different interesting ways. But number one, Mashpia doesn't just mean giver and taker, giver and receiver. A Mashpia is a leader. The job of a Mashpia is to lead. A leader is fundamentally independent. At Alter Rebbe, we say, Alter Rebbe is a chiddush that the Rebbe is nicht elend. But kipshutai, a leader, someone who is taka, able to lead, which means he has a totally different perspective than everyone else. Mishichmei v'mayla gevayim kalam. He's independent. A man, the role of a man in the marriage is to be Mashpia. Mashpia means that you have your own power. You come, like we see by Hashem, we all have emunah, hopefully bitachin in Hashem. As Yeshivas Halavavis proves and shows that to have bitachin in a mitzias that has never let you down and is always there and is always present and is always focused on you, that's where bitachin really develops. A man, a husband, needs to bring this home, which means your power has to be independent, has to be unique. You are not swayed and affected by every little comment or mood that's going on. Because you come, you bring independence, you bring starkheit. You have your own metzias. You're not just an extension of your wife. The vice versa is also true, but in a totally different way. We'll get there. The man has to bring home this strength. Now, this strength is not by asserting your position and fighting and being a dictator and controlling. The Mashpia, the leader, comes and brings strength home because he be'etzem is merumim. He has his own identity. He has his own power. His strength is inherent. By no means am I saying that women don't have an avoid of their own. Avoid of a makabel is a huge parsha, a huge sugya, but that's not what we're doing here tonight. We're just going to focus on the Mashpia. So the Mashpia is the one that brings this independence to the relationship. He comes with this, he is strong. And we know women, their fundamental need, the first need that a woman has in marriage is trust and safety. And she needs, like we need Hashem, we need to be able to Hashlech al Hashem Yehavcha. We need to be able to totally let go and be embraced and held by Hashem. A woman has that fundamental need. And when she comes home, and when these differences come out, and she feels like these differences are creating friction, creating issues, she's not safe. And that just exasperates. But here's where we need to understand fundamental difference between men and women. Al pi Chassidus. Back to the Maimer. Men, let's call it men are seichel. Women are midas. What is the difference between men and seichel and midas? Seichel sees things, looks at the lens through which seichel looks at the world is, does this make sense? Is this real? Is this true? So you have a paper with 10 different numbers on it, you have to add them all together. Seichel doesn't look at each number, doesn't care about each number. Seichel only cares that the bottom line should be true. Midas, on the other hand, Midas, Sheish Yam Asa Shem Sa'aretz, Shisha Ktavis, Midas are real mitzias. Midas are, as it is. You look at each line of this equation. How does the first line make me feel? How does the second line make me feel? That's real. The experience is real. This is ultimate tachtonim. That there's just as it is. Can't explain why, but as it is. Men, we go into right away. We want to understand it, figure it out. Is it right? Is it wrong? Something's wrong with you. Why are you doing this? Metzias, midas just is. As it is. The best example you could see of this. Well, what do midas need? What do midas need? Very, very simple. And this is a huge relief. What do midas need? Midas need, like metzias, midas need time and space. Zehu. Look at Loyolenu, you look at Avelus. We have people sitting in real midas, real pain, real emotion, raw emotion. What do? We Pasha create this house, Shiva house, where there's 7 days, there's 30 days, whatever it is, there's time and there's space, and that's it. You don't have to come there and convince them why the Eibush has a plan. It's not about telling them, it's being masbir why this is kifiyah kavana. Pashit. Time and space. And we see time and space, the heart gets over it and moves on. Why is this such a relief? Because we come in and we think, oh, this is Midas. She's going crazy. She's panicking. There's a problem here. Wife comes home and there's, especially these days, after school, before camp, there's all the kids in her head, and there's this, and then we have to make dinner. A big balagan, overwhelming. You walk in, no problem. Get a babysitter for this, and we'll order delivery for this, and no. Doesn't make her happy. Adrab. You totally missed the point. Because it's not about seichel. Midas live in a different world. It's a world of mitzias. As it is. Just let it be. Respect the difference. Respect the independence. This is her universe. This is how she operates. You don't have to do anything about it. She doesn't need your help. For Haraya, she lived 20 plus years without you. And everything was perfectly fine. Af eitzes, you don't need your eitzes. This is strength. This is the Mashpia. Mashpia comes, and this storm, this chaos, this panic, this stress, whatever's going on, not chas v'shalom dismissing it, but you can let it be. First of all, you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to fix it. What do you need? Time and space. Presence, focus, attention, calm, and it goes away. What do midas need? They need time and space. You give time and space, and midas go away. Are we? A very important thing that the Mashpia needs Let's follow this yichud. I know we're supposed to speak about beyond Sholom Bayis, beyond the yichud. We're supposed to speak about the kedusha, the unique specialness of husband and wife together. But the truth is, it all flows straight in. Dirab Tachtonim, yichud, is only shaykh when it's the entire person, the entire being. The ultimate place where the yichud occurs is obviously in intimacy. But real, true intimacy is not about a physical act. It's not about that. It's about yichud. It's about we are living life together, and we. I want to say one more thing before we get into this. The Rogachover spoke about. The Rebbe brings it that the Rogachover speaks about marriage, about kiddushin, as a pool in Imsheches. Not pshat it happened once, and now we could just sail weiter. Pool in Imsheches is pshat that it's happening every moment. And what we learn about marriage, what we see about marriage, is that just because yesterday was good, doesn't mean today's going to be good. Because it's a chiddush, because we're talking about two different things, the pashut has to be daily investment. You can't take your marriage for granted from yesterday. It has to be recreated, chiddush yesh ma'ayin, every single day. And I think a very practical way to do this, an important thing we also see from the Rebbe is that a couple has to spend a certain amount of time, 10, 20 minutes a day, together, connecting. Not sitting together on the couch on your phones, not talking about who's coming for Shabbos and who's picking up the kids and what has to happen. Not talking about any business. Pasha connecting as two people. And everyone connects in a different way, that's fine. But there has to be an amount of time, again, time and space, where we focus on creating this connection. Yes, we're different, but now it's time to focus on the connection. And the truth is, I think that, we can talk about chinuch and we can read books and we can argue and debate about chinuch, but the type of chinuch, that the effect on the children of seeing mami tati connecting, spending time together, not figuring out problems and not planning and all the good stuff, but Pasha having a cup of tea, connecting, enjoying each other's company, creates a very, very strong sense of safety and stability in the home. And the chinuch is totally, totally different. We know this idea from the Rebbe that when Dr. Weiss came in at Shmini Atzeres, after a while, after a few weeks, he had to go back home. And he said to Rebbe, my wife needs me. The Rebbe said, of course you have to go home. You have to be with your wife. The Rebbe said, the one thing that I'm missing over here, being in his room, is that I don't have the opportunity to go home every day and spend 20 minutes having tea with the Rebbetzin. And the line that Dr. Weiss Chazer, that the Rebbe said to him, is that those 20 minutes a day that he has tea with the Rebbetzin are as important to him as putting on tefillin. Yichud, intimacy, is a continuation of this theme. As Chassidim, Kadshatz Mutrlach is a Chiv Dairaisa. But Kadshatz Mutrlach means that it's not about, we're not here to be Malataiva. It's not about a physical thing. Malataiva. It's not about a physical thing. When the focus is on Yichud, we're not distracted by anything else. Yes, a real Yichud has to be a Yichud Gashmi, Yichud Pnimi. But that's not the focus. The focus is seeing another person, seeing your wife as independent, totally separate than you, and connecting through those differences. And that's the real intimacy. Unfortunately, I think that while I'm going to finish with this because we're running out of time here, but Amol, the Chassidim, for what we call Chassidim, but Midas HaChassidus was precious. Precious was all about, let's not get distracted by Gashmias. Let's not get distracted by any of these things. And it was, precious was the Derech HaAvodah. In a way, today's day and age, first of all, the Rebbe was shoyl that. But also, in a way, what's happened is that we stay up late, everyone's busy. By the time it's nighttime, everyone's exhausted. And the bottom line is, at least from people that I've spoken to, is for most, the struggle is not about precious. The struggle is, it doesn't happen enough. Marriage needs intimacy. Yichud is part of marriage. And in a healthy marriage, it's mukhrach. It's part of the connection. It's part of this dir b'tachtonim yichud dynamic. And we have a chiyuv. There's a chiyuv oina, besides for the chiyuv oina, which is again getting stuck in showed us that in our generation, the Mesiras Nefesh is not losing your life, the Mesiras Nefesh is living your life. The Avodah is not the precious and the separating. We have enough of that. The real...
Very special, powerful presentation, Shukar Rabbi Einstein. And Shukar for all of us for making it out, for being here, and for investing in our mishpachas. At the end of the day, there's nothing refreshing it. Refreshing the halachas, refreshing the hashkafa is what keeps those are at the foundation, at the root of a Yiddish home. So let's continue. Lalis, Michael Choyel.